Hello and welcome to another lovely edition of Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you out there in the internet land get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin. I'm a Christian apologist coming to you live from Trinity Lutheran Christian School and Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I am thrilled to say, after about a month of dodging weather and illness and etc., look who we finally have with us. Say hi.
Hi.
Who are you?
Chris Boggs, worship leader here at Trinity Lutheran. Happy to be here after all of that.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. For those of you, we'll get to what the subject of the show is here in a moment. But before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about what the show is all about and how you can get a topic on the air. Like I said, the show is called Hey Ask Me Stuff, which means that we pick topics every single week based upon what questions you all out there have asked, what you have asked for me to be answering, or sometimes, as you can see, when it's a little bit out of my bailiwick, I bring in someone whose bailiwick it is and let them answer it with my admittedly probably less valuable contributions. If you have a question that you would like to see on a future episode, here's how you do it. You go to this website right here, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. On that page, you will find a form that you can fill out, a little online form where you can submit a question. You can do it anonymously if you want to, and then every week we go through those questions that have been submitted, we pick one, and we answer it live on the air. We are live every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you can watch us live, great. You are invited to be part of the conversation if you're watching us live. As a matter of fact, if you are watching us live here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, you can submit your comment in the live chat. I will see it here, and we can actually interact. It'll appear on the screen, actually, too. We can interact, go back and forth. So agree with us, disagree with us, just have a follow-up question, whatever it may be. Go ahead, and if you're watching it live, put it in the live chat there, and let's have a conversation. If you're not watching us live, that's okay. You can still interact, too. Just go in the comments section. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on our topic, both this week and every week. So, let's see. Oh, I did want to give one more update. I had mentioned last week that we have now officially set our new subscriber goal. Those of you who have been following the program for a while know that back in July, actually I think technically in June we set it, we set a annual goal of trying to reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of the fiscal year. Now, we are on a July 1st through June 30th fiscal year, so that meant reaching 2,000 subscribers by this coming June 30th, 2024. Well, we hit that goal about 4 weeks ago, so we were well ahead of schedule on that. So thank you to everybody out there who's been subscribing. Please continue to share this channel with all of your friends, family, Romans, countrymen. Lend them your ears. Whatever, we'd love the support. And so last week I did say that we set a new goal of trying to reach 2,500 subscribers by the same date. Why not? June 30th, we're shooting for 2,500 subscribers, and I will tell you we are already 1/5 of the way there. As we are sitting here right now, this instant, we are sitting at 2,102 subscribers. Thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, well, I thank you in advance. You are anticipatorily thanked because I know you're clicking that subscribe button right now as we're talking, and you're clicking that bell as well so you get notifications, don't miss any of the wonderful content we have here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. So, all right, all the preliminaries out of the way. Let's get to talking about what the topic of the week is, shall we? So here's our question of the week that was submitted. Is there a standard for worship music quality? And I will say, and Chris, I'll let you take this once I send it over to you. I'll let you take whatever direction you want to. My gut feeling is that this comes from a perspective of a more contemporary worship style, but I do think that some of the question could apply regardless. I mean, it's somebody singing in a choir, somebody playing on the organ. Is there a standard? Now, the question, the full question as it was asked, there was kind of a question, a sub-question, and then some commentary. We'll get to the commentary in a little bit, but let me just put out there how this question was asked of us. It says, should there be a standard for worship music quality? Should worship music include people who do not sound good by human standards? We all know that the earth has its own standards as far as what makes good music, what doesn't make good music. Is that something that you as a worship leader leader consider when putting together a worship team? And you're on, go.
Well, Ken, as I told you earlier, I don't think there's an easy answer to this question, and I think that's the case with a lot of questions related to how matters of faith interact with things that are earthly like this. I mean, there are definitely a couple different ways of looking at it and a couple different angles to this question. I would say, in general, there should be at least a minimum standard, but it's not a standard that every church, for example, can meet, to be perfectly honest. And I think that's just a reality. It always has been a reality. I agree with what you said earlier that this question, I think, pertains more to the contemporary style of worship that is so prevalent in a lot of churches, including our own today. But I think it's something that has been an issue in the church for hundreds of years. Since the time that church choirs and soloists have done their thing.
So I guess here's the dilemma. Okay, if I can put out there what I see as being the tension here. All right. First of all, we know that we're not the world, right? And so where do you draw that line as far as judging by the world standards versus God's standards? Is there a difference? And also, I mean, a worship service is not a concert, all right? And it shouldn't be a concert. We are lifting our praises to God. So let me start with this, because this is a good lead. I showed you some scriptures here. Let me see if I can pull one of them up here on the screen. I'm going to pull up the first one, the Romans 12, 6 through 8, and then I'll tell you why I was thinking about this particular scripture when we had this question asked of us. It says, we have different gifts. Let me rephrase that. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. If it is to sing in the worship band, then sing your heart out. I know, I might be editorializing a little bit there.
I think that's implied.
Implied at the end.
Yeah.
But maybe that makes you see where I'm going with it. I think that it is biblical to say that not everybody obviously has the same gifts. And leading worship is a gift. No different than we wouldn't say that every single Christian is called to be a pastor, right?
Right.
And so clearly there are different gifts and there are different callings, and we need to discern that. So before we get to the more difficult question, let me ask you this from your own personal experience. At some point, you felt a call to be a worship leader. How did that happen? Whoop, I'm hitting my own microphone. Let's not do that. All right. How did you gain that sense of calling to know that this is what you thought God was calling you to do?
Well, if I'm perfectly honest, it was partly the urging of my mother. I had never seriously considered being a church music leader. Even through my college days when I was majoring in music, that wasn't my plan. But when I got out of college, my mom, who was also a longtime church musician and a very, very good musician, saw that there was an opening, a part-time opening for a church music director at a church in Baltimore, and she thought it would be like a perfect part-time opportunity for me to get involved in this, and I did, and it didn't take long for me to see that it was something that I really enjoyed, something that was really satisfying to me, and which I could see was also making a difference in the life of the church.
Well, isn't that, I think sometimes, even if you're unsure about the calling when you get into it, I mean, I think sometimes God can reaffirm that. So you're once you're kind of getting into something, it's like, yeah, this is the calling. This is where I want you. This is where I placed you. That being said, I think there's also a risk that we can confuse God's calling with our personal desires. And God does not always call us to what we want. And I found this really fascinating. We had a YouTube short from Pastor Dave Simpson was here this past weekend. He was a guest preacher. Used to be a pastor here at Trinity a long time ago, and then he was coming back for part of our 150th anniversary celebration. And yesterday we had a YouTube short where he told this great story about how he was on Jeopardy. He was a finalist on Jeopardy, and he was trying to ring in, and he was ringing in too early. And so he was always getting beaten by the other contestants, because if you ring in too early, you get frozen out for a little while. And so he was so determined that on the next clue, he was going to wait. He was going to listen to Alex Trebek. He was going to wait for that light to light up that indicated that it was okay to ring in, and he was going to ring in first. And he was ultra focused on that. And he did. He successfully rang in first, but in the whole process of focusing on ringing in first, he kind of forgot that the first thing is that he should know the answer to the question, or the question to the answer, as the case may be. And so when Alex called his name, he just stood there dumbfounded and didn't answer. And he pointed out that this is kind of a parallel for his faith journey, because just like when Alex was calling out to him and he didn't answer, there are many times throughout his life he felt, God was calling out to him and he didn't answer God. Well, one of the comments we got on that YouTube short was, how do you know it's God calling you? And I found that very poignant, in the sense that I do think sometimes we confuse what we want and our desires and our voice for God's voice. And you could agree with me. I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but one of the ways I think that we as Christians really should discern whether or not a calling is truly from God is by not doing it in isolation. Because that's where you have the risk when you don't consult other people about it, and you just say, I think this is where God's calling me. Well, you're at a pretty high risk of just confusing your own desires for God's calling. And so instead, a decision like that, whether it be the pastoral ministry or anything else, I think should be done in consultation with other Christians, and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Can we talk about this? Can we explore this? And see what kind of response you get. Are other people also sensing that this is your calling?
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. That's one of those, many examples of, why church is best done in community, and I think encouragement for someone who obviously shows gifts in a certain area is a big plus in helping them, I think, to determine, whether that thing that they're doing is something God wants them to do, or something they just simply want to do on their own. So I think if you're hearing that kind of encouragement from, more than one person, I mean, one person is fine, but if you're hearing that from multiple people, I think you can safely assume that maybe this is something you should seriously consider.
So then let's ask the harder question. Let's say you have someone who is convinced that this is their calling, but you're not, okay? Aside from the fact that I would say, again, it shouldn't be any one person's decision. I think it should be a group. But let's just say we have a situation where maybe multiple trustworthy sources are not feeling that this person has an accurate sense of their calling. And again, we're talking in the context of music ministry. How do you approach that? How would you approach someone who is absolutely convinced this is what they should be doing, when maybe the consensus of the rest of the church is, maybe you shouldn't be?
Well, that's where I think it's a tough question, to be perfectly honest. And I think probably the answer to that is a tough conversation that someone in the church has to have. Preferably a leader in the church has to have with that person at some point after they've. I think you have to give everybody a chance. And that might that might not be a short amount of time. It might be a longer period of time that you'd want to see what a person can do. But at some point, you reach a conclusion. Okay, this is not what this person is gifted to do, or this is. And if it's not, it's really more helpful, truthfully, to the person involved if someone in church leadership sits down with them and says, "Listen, I don't think this is your thing." I think one other way that you might approach it is you give that person opportunities, but opportunities in other areas that might not be so much at the forefront. Do you know what I'm saying there?
Yeah. Well, and it gets back to, here's another scripture I'll bring up here.
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of, is the 1 Corinthians 12, 4-6. Same gist as that Romans passage, but it adds one little other element to it. It says there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. Mm-hmm. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. And so if you put these two passages together, I think what you walk away from is realizing, look, everyone has been given gifts by the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
That we are to use for God, for God's glory. So understand that if your fellow church members are trying to tell you that maybe this in particular is not your gift, they're not telling you you're not gifted. Mm-hmm. All right. And there's still other ways that you can and should serve. And so I think that part of the conversation about our gifts and our callings needs to be not just the negative aspects of it, but needs to be the positive aspects of it. Of, okay, maybe this is not where you're being called to, but let's work together to figure out where you are, because you are still a valued person here. You're still a valued member of this church community. And I can tell you right now, you have gifts. Maybe you don't know what they are yet. And that's what we're here for, to walk with you in community to figure out what those are. But the flip side of this, and I'm going to ask you also how you handle this situation, is, look, we're all human, right?
Yep.
And when you get a group of people together, inevitably you're going to have some type of interpersonal conflict, because, well, we're human,
Yes.
We're fallen.
Yep.
And so sometimes maybe the feeling that this particular person is not called to the worship ministry, to leading worship ministry, is not so much because of a lack of gifting as much of a I don't like working with that person, or I don't want to be with that person. How do you generate? I mean, we've got to understand, look, we're not all, I think it was Pastor Jay a few weeks ago said in his message, look, there are people sitting here in these pews that you probably do not associate with or would not associate with outside of this church. If you didn't meet them here in church, you wouldn't be going out with them and all that. And yet we're all still unified in the cause of Christ. And that is something that I think even more manifests itself in what really is a close-knit ministry-related group, where you have a group that is supposed to be coming together to accomplish some particular ministry of the church, in this case, the worship ministry. So how do you get past that, I guess, where someone, you might have a little bit of feelings, between the members of your worship team, where somebody's saying, I don't think this person's being called to the worship ministry, where you sit back as a worship leader and say, actually, I think you both are. I just think we need to become unified and work together for Christ. How do you handle that kind of situation?
Well, I think what you said is what you have to do. I think you have to continually try to focus on on the task at hand and focus on keeping that group unified despite whatever differences, whatever disagreements there may be, because it may be that people don't even like each other. I hate to think that, but it is true. I mean, even Christians don't necessarily like each other all the time. I mean, there are certain characteristics that, might get on somebody else's nerves, and that doesn't change despite the fact that you're a Christian. But I do think, there's a definite, like a spiritual element, and that's what makes this so different. In the context of a musical group in church, it's different from, a musical group anywhere else outside of church, because there is a spiritual aspect to this that you have to be aware of and to maintain. And I think that starts, honestly, with each individual member. And that's something I would definitely emphasize is anybody participating in the worship ministry of a church through a praise team or a choir or, whatever it may be, has to really do some soul searching. They have to, I think, understand, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to promote myself? Am I doing this to satisfy my own desires? Or do I have a genuine, sincere but humble desire to serve God through this?
Everything always comes back to movies, and of course, that's the end of it. What you just said is basically a paraphrase of the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Are you doing it for Christ's glory or yours?
Yeah.
Seeking the Holy Grail.
Mm-hmm. Right. I remember. Yeah. It's been a while.
Great movie.
Yep.
All right. Arguably the best Indiana Jones movie. It's ask me on which day, it's either that or Raiders. 1 and 1A. I can never pick between two of them. All right. Well, let me. I did promise at the beginning that the individual who asked us this question online, after asking the question, kind of had some additional commentary, and so I'm gonna read that, and so we can kind of share our thoughts with that. And then we did have one other person when the show was supposed to be airing like a month ago, who shared some thoughts as well. They asked us to go into, so we'll get into that as well next. But the original questioner said this. If they lead worship and sound good by human standards, the congregation tends to better enjoy and engage more with the music being performed. When they sound bad by human standards, the congregation tends to be taken out of the experience and distracted. Is this something that should be considered? Does it matter if it impacts church attendance? What about if those people negatively impact the musical performance of others, further exacerbating the issue? And these questions are all secondary to the original, obviously, which is why I took them up secondarily. And I'm going to say this for starters, and then I'll throw this over to you for your thoughts, Chris. The one thing, but doesn't matter if it impacts church attendance. My opinion, absolutely not, as a primary motivator. In other words, I think far too many churches use the metric of how many derrieres are sitting in their seats as the metric for determining success and determining of what they're doing. That ain't how Jesus measured it, okay?
Right.
And so this is going to maybe bother some people, but I don't care that much how many people are worshiping are sitting in the pews or the seats if what we are doing is truly honoring God and according to God's will. And I mean, that's the primary focus. So let's just say, and I'm not saying this is the answer, but let's just say hypothetically the answer to this question was, it doesn't matter, you can sing like a strained cat and you belong to the worship team biblically. Well, if that's the biblical answer and it's driving everybody away, I don't care. Now, I don't think that's a biblical answer. We've already talked about that. I think there is a discerning of gifts that goes on here. Now, church attendance as a secondary thing, well, sure, naturally, you want to be honoring God, and there are certain things you need to, as a practical matter, take into account. If people aren't paying giving their offering, then the church doors can't stay open. Sometimes that's also God's will, though, and we need to appreciate that. But sometimes God will call a church to be true to him, even though it's going to lead to the closure of that church. All right? In which case, you do what God tells you to do, and you close the church. Because too many people think these churches get in competition with each other. We think like we're an individual corporation in competition with the other churches. I got news for you. Even if as much as it saddens me every time a church closes, it does. But the church never closes. And so even when one particular location, if they're being true to God's word, and as a result, they get persecuted or whatever, and that particular church ends up closing its doors, God's still in control, and he's still going to triumph in the end. So that's why I say that is not, I don't think it should not be a primary metric that we use for this. So what were your thoughts, not just about that necessarily, but about the other things that were mentioned in this comment?
Well, I think we we can start with the understanding that the Bible, and I think God Himself recognizes that I mean, God is the giver of these gifts in the first place, and I think He Himself understands that that there is such a thing as, for example, if we're talking about music, that there's such a thing as musical talent, that there are that He is giving this ability to people to be able to successfully sing or to play an instrument.
Oh, sure. We see it in the Bible. We see individuals like David, you know, that are specifically called out as having those gifts. So obviously they're gifts that not everybody has.
Right. And so it's something that some have and some don't. So it's certainly biblical to recognize that in people and recognize that some people have it and some people don't. So we're not being unkind to those people. Now, I think you can certainly argue that there are degrees of talent, and maybe that's part of where the discussion comes in too. Is that one person's has a greater ability to do one thing than the other. But I think we do have to be aware to some extent. What if you're doing music in church? You have to be somewhat conscious of what it sounds like. I think the standard for me. I mean, I ministered in a small church for a long time, and when you're in a small church setting where you have limited people, limited resources, you have to adjust your expectations a bit. What might be good to me, based on what I know about that church and the people there, might not be good to somebody else. But I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, let me do a follow on something you just said before I lose track of it, because you did just mention, that obviously, yes, to some extent you have to take these things into account. And this is another one of the scriptures I shared with you beforehand. This is the last one there on the page, 1 Corinthians 14:26. It says, "What then shall we say, brothers and sisters, when you come together? Each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation." And then here's the key, I think. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean built up purely in numbers, okay? It's building up spiritually. Yes. The church being built up spiritually. And so I think that is the primary metric for what you're saying, in my view. As far as, yes, you do have to take these things into account, asking, is what I'm doing building the church up? Now, depending on the various levels of gifts within a particular congregation, you may have a group of people in one congregation that can serve on the worship team, and that will be building up that particular congregation. And if you were to take that same group of people, and transplant them into another church that has a broader talent pool, so to speak, then maybe that same group of people isn't building up that church. Yes. So anyway, I think that's probably the metric for deciding whether or not, whether this person is gifted to be called here. I think it's possible, and I'm sure you've seen this before too, where somebody maybe isn't as called to be part of the worship ministry in this particular church, but they find that they are called to be part of it at another church. I've seen that a number of times. And again, if we keep in mind that the big C church, the universal church, is really what we're supposed to be considered ourselves to be part of, not solely loyal to our individual congregation. Individual congregations serve a purpose. That's where you get those close interpersonal relationships to help you persevere through suffering, to support you and to teach you. So I'm not diminishing the value of the individual church by any means, but ultimately it needs to be seen as some sort subordinate to the universal church. So if somebody leaves our church or congregation and goes to another congregation and they're building that congregation up, great, more power to them.
Right. And I agree. And I think, in this day and age, especially when, the bigger churches and, certainly the mega churches in many cases are the ones who are just, brimming with talent. To the point that they have they have more talented people than they truly need.
Maybe you share some of them with the rest of them. No, just
yeah, I mean, it really honestly would be better for the church overall, and certainly for those smaller congregations, for those people to spread out and share that with them.
Yeah. All right, let me turn to the other question that was asked of us kind of the last time we were supposed to go to air. And I honestly, we may have addressed some of this already, but let's take a look here. It says, how would you approach asking someone to leave the worship team whose heart isn't in it or doesn't give the appearance to the congregation that they want to be there? Should the worship choir team members, the worship team members or the choir team members come from, let's get back to this. That's a different question. Let's go to the first question first.
Okay.
All right. So how would you approach asking someone to leave the worship team whose heart isn't in it or doesn't give the appearance to the congregation that they want to be there? Those I think might be considered two different questions. So we're not necessarily here talking about someone that you think doesn't have the gifting to do it. But question 1A would be they don't really seem to have the heart for it. Their desire is not in it. And I think question 1B is, well, maybe they do have the heart for it, but they're not communicating that to the congregation. How do you handle that situation?
Oh, gosh. And this is, again, I think it's a perfect example of why, church isn't always easy. And I think certainly pastors understand that. It a lot of times involves.
So you pass the buck to the pastor.
No, I'm not. I think it applies to anyone in church leadership. Right down to, Sunday school teachers and, people who are in lots of different positions. Sometimes it involves some tough or at least personal conversations. And I think this is one of those examples of how maintaining relationships with your people is really important when you're in any kind of church leadership, or at least to the extent that you can, trying to foster those kinds of relationships, because then when the time comes to have a conversation like this, it's a little bit easier. Otherwise, it can be, truthfully, I'll be honest, I'm not particularly good at this myself. I don't relish having conversations. I've had to have a few down through the years that I've been involved in this, and they're kind of awkward, to be perfectly honest, sometimes at least. But if you have a relationship with that person, it's easier to say, what's going on here? Your heart doesn't seem to be in this, or whatever.
Yeah. Ultimately, you want to make sure it's clear that where it's coming from. It's coming from a place of, concern and friendship and love.
Sure.
The second part of this question says, should worship members or choir team members come from different churches, or should they be members or regular attendees of the church? Does it make the congregation look or appear uninterested in having a worship team if you have singers or musicians from other churches fill the team? I will let you comment on this one first, sir. What say you?
I would say, in general, it's a good idea to have committed members of a team from one church that are playing and singing consistently. I don't think there's any. I don't think there should really be a lot of debate about that. And I think it does, when you see that same group of people performing, for lack of a better word, week in and week out, I think there is a good stability and consistency to that. With that said, I don't think it hurts once in a while to have a guest singer, a guest musician, or even a few join in. And certainly we do that a lot, on the choir side, for example. I've invited numerous people down through the years to help with, presentations at holidays and things like that, when they can, truly be helpful. And in fact, I was just having a conversation today with a friend of mine who's coming to sing with our choir at Easter. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as I said, once in a while. But I think in general, yes, they should be. Ideally, I think members of the church, but then again, sometimes these are good ways to draw people in to becoming more committed members of the church.
And I when I saw that question, I admit I was initially of two minds about it, because the first thought that occurred to me was a lot that the rant I just went on, right? We are the universal church. That's what we're supposed to be prioritizing, not the individual congregation. Yeah. We're all in this together. That was my audition. Am I going to be on the next? No, kidding.
We need to have a talk about gifts, Ken.
So anyway, but so that was my first reaction when I saw that. But then I get back to the flip side of the coin is it's a worship leader. All right, it is someone, again, it's not a concert. We're not just talking about a performance. We're talking about someone who is supposed to be leading this particular congregation in worship. And so what that means, I think, is twofold. Number one, it needs to be someone that the congregation is more likely to be led by. And if it is someone they don't know, then it runs the risk of becoming more of a concert feel than a leader feel. Yes. The other side of it is it is a worship leader. This is a leadership position in the church. I know a lot of musicians might not think of themselves this way, but you are a leader in the church. And it's almost like an inverted pyramid is the imagery I like to make. If someone comes in the door, all right, we're Trinity Lutheran Church, right? So we are a Lutheran church. Does that mean that to even sit down in a pew on a Sunday morning, you have to agree to all the tenets of classical Lutheran theology? No, of course it doesn't, okay? You come in the door, you can sit, okay. But now you want to be a Sunday school teacher. All right, now maybe you have to accept a few more things, all right?
Yep.
Now you want to be a worship leader. Now you need to accept a few more things. Now you want to be a pastor. We're pretty much throwing the book at you, okay? And so the number of, shall we say, theological points that you have to be in agreement upon grows the higher up the responsibility ladder, I guess you could say, you go. So while a worship leader is not the pastor, okay? I don't want to make it seem like it is. So I don't think your worship leaders need to adhere to every single theological point that a pastor does. They definitely need to adhere to more than your average person in the pew does, all right? You have to know that this is a person with a solid faith, so that, again, getting back to building the church up, they'll be in a position to really build that church up. And if you have a habit of bringing in outside musicians, then you just don't know that about them. You don't know that about them.
You do not.
And so that's where I ended up coming down on it the same place you did. And I think I'm going to look at it real quick. We just got a comment here from a pastor, Pastor Reese Turner, who might have just said the same thing I did. Let's see. She said, nope. And they said, we must know them that labor among us, or we can open ourselves up to spirits that are not beneficial to our particular house. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at. You have to, because it is a leadership position. Glad to know that, the pastor agrees with me, so my job is safe. Or associate pastor. I'm pretty sure Pastor Jay agrees with that too. But yeah, it's because it is a leadership position, there is a certain standard that you should have for somebody being up there. That was my thought anyway.
Well, yeah, no, and I agree with you. I think it depends on what kind of leadership that they're going to be exercising. And secondly, I think it falls on somebody who, like a worship leader or a pastor, if you're inviting someone in from outside to participate, you need to know what kind of person that person is, because obviously the rest of the people are not going to know.
Yeah.
And they need to be able to trust that what they're seeing is something that's going to be beneficial to them.
Yeah, it is leadership. It is a leadership position in the church, and it needs to be treated that way. And I sometimes, I don't want to put more pressure on the musicians and have your whole team quit on you here. But I do think that, it's an important thing for anybody, whether I'm not just obviously just talking here at Trinity. This podcast goes out to the world. So anybody who's serving on a worship team, on a choir, whatever, understand that you are not a performer. This is not a concert. This is not, you're not like in the chamber choir or whatever. That's not what this is. People aren't paying admission to come hear you sing. You're not the target of their attention. At least you shouldn't be. All right. Your job is to not be the target of their attention.
Yep.
Your job is to redirect their attention to the ultimate target above, that is God. All right.
Yep.
And so, because that, to quote another wonderful pop culture reference, with great power comes great responsibility. It is a great responsibility to be up there in a worship team as well. And so, yeah, I don't have a problem with occasional guests coming in, as long as, number one, there's some kind of discernment. I mean, heck, let's just look from a pastoral perspective. We invited guest preachers. Now, granted, they were preachers that we knew because they'd all been here at Trinity before for our 150th anniversary. But we did invite guest preachers into the pulpit. But there's, again, because I say we did know all of these, there's some level of discernment of who it is that you're putting into that position before you allow them to do it. And the same thing here.
Well, I totally agree with you. I wish, honestly, the people who are a part of a worship team or a choir or whatever aspect of the worship ministry they're a part of, I wish they saw themselves more as leaders, but not in a way that that puffs them up, not in a way that gives them a big head about it. I mean, it really is exactly the opposite. I mean, it really should be something that humbles us, that it's something that we get to do in the course of our ministry.
Well, who's our leader, right? Jesus Christ came to serve, not to be served. He was washing people's feet.
Yep.
He died on a cross for us. So that's the model of Christian leadership that I think we all need to have. So those were the various different ways this question was presented to us. Was there anything else, Chris, that I did not ask you about that was pressing on your mind while you were thinking about this that we didn't get to talk about?
Oh gosh, I don't think so, Ken. I think that pretty well covers it. I did want to say, just kind of to tag on to what you were saying at the end. I think one of the best verses for a worship leader in any capacity, whether you're the lead person or whether you're in the playing an instrument or singing or reading, whatever it happens to be. I think that the thing you can keep in mind, the thing that I like to keep in mind is the verse that says, "I must decrease so that he might increase."
Oh yeah,
that's ultimately what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming on. I really appreciate it. Like I said, when we get asked, sometimes we get asked these questions that are not exactly the bailiwick of an apologist so much. And so I have my thoughts, but I'll be the first to admit that my thoughts are probably not as well thought out and don't come with as much experience behind them as yours do. So
don't underestimate yourself, Ken.
I used to be a musician, and so that's why I can speak your language. I just
Absolutely.
Haven't picked up the trombone or the piano in a very long time. That's not true. I have a keyboard at home. I can still play two songs. I can play Jolly Old St. Nicholas, and I can play The First Noel.
Okay.
Not very well, mind you. I mean, these are like what you would expect like maybe a third grader to play, but I can still pull those off. But that's about it on the piano. Trombone, I don't even have my trombone anymore. So.
Oh my.
But yeah, so anyway, thank you all very much for coming here today. Watching here today. Really do appreciate it. Again, as a quick reminder, we are here live every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I haven't checked it in the meantime, but I said at the beginning of the show, we were 2,102, trying to get to 2,500 subscribers before June 30th. And the best way that can happen is with your help. If you can go ahead and share the channel, tell everybody what you love about it. We'd really appreciate it. And again, if there's any questions that you want to see on a future episode of Hey, Ask Me Stuff, go here. Go to trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. Fill out the form that's on there. Submit your question, and you never know. You might see your question get answered on a future episode. If you want Chris to be back on again, you just got to ask another music question. That's how it goes. I mean, last time you were here, Chris, we were doing... should Christians listen to secular music, right?
That was a great one.
I think we got some very popular YouTube shorts out of that one, too. So, I'm going to maybe cut a few out of this one, too, and see how you do.
All right.
So we'll have Chris versus Chris. We'll compare this podcast versus the last podcast. So, no, seriously, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you again, not just here on Hey, Ask Me Stuff. You can join us again next week at 6:30 p.m. But you know what? if you're in the Joppa, Maryland area, we are about, 20 miles northeast of Baltimore, if that, something like that. If you're in the area, come down and worship with us. We're here every Sunday morning. 9 a.m. traditional, 11 a.m. is our contemporary service, 1100 Philadelphia Road. We are right off the Mountain Road exit, which is exit 72, right? Yeah.
You got me.
74. 74. Yeah. Exit 74 off of I-95, and then you just kind of hop down Mountain Road, take a left on Philadelphia Road, Route 7, and we are right there. You can even see us from the interstate. So come join us. We'd really love to see you, love to worship with you. But even if you're not in the area, or if you are and you don't want to come here, hey, that's fine. It's all about the universal church, right? Find yourself a good Bible-believing church where you can worship in community, worship our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That's the best thing for you. So thank you again, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken.
And thank you all for watching. We hope to see you again next week. God bless.